Morning, everybody. Happy Saturday. I hope y'all are having an awesome weekend. Guys, it is time once again to let it rip. Guys, we have a jam packed episode for y'all this morning. But before we get to the fun and festivities, couple of things that we got to hit right at the top. Guys, we are again live 9:30 a.m. Eastern every Saturday morning like clockwork. So guys, if you know somebody who would benefit from raw, authentic conversation about topics that matter, go ahead, do a favor. There's a button right next to wherever you're watching, says share. Go ahead and share the show with a friend. Also, there's a box underneath wherever you're watching, the comment section. Say good morning. Let us know where you're tuning in from. Let us know what questions you have along the way. We invite the discourse. We love to hear from you guys along the way. So, to get this party started and to get us rolling, I'm going to go ahead and kick it over to the host with the most. Good morning, Pastor TC.
What's up, y'all, and good morning, everybody. It is good to be live today. I'm super excited about our conversation today. We're talking about mental health and ableism, and man, this is one I've been truthfully excited for a while. We do have a very special guest with us today. Would you like to introduce yourself, Miss Doctor Peggy?
Oh, am I the special guest? All right.
You're a special guest.
Thank you so much, TC. I'm Dr. Peggy Mitchell Clark. I help Christian women in particular who are on fire for God and who want
Mm,
to confidently walk in their calling and fulfill their deepest heart's desires. And so I have a background in clinical psychology. I was a
mm.
therapist for many years. I've been a college professor, and I also am a mentor and a coach in particular for Christian women, professionals, and entrepreneurs.
Oh man, that's a extensive and beautiful resume. Yes, thank you for being here today. We're going to just dive into this, guys. You know how we are. Before we get there, in the chat, if you're watching already, if you're lurking somewhere, do me a couple things you might need to do. Go ahead and get some Folgers in your cup. Go ahead, wake up a little bit. I know it's a little bit early, and you might need to go ahead and wake up and get the cobwebs out your eye. I even got a little dust down my eyes and wiping it out. Um, Also, say good morning if you're here. Like they say, don't be rude, say it back, right? So let's go ahead and begin to wake up and talk to each other. Again, we just said like and share because it helps. Guys, mental health has been a rapid issue in the United States for, I would go there, say maybe centuries. And we have progressively improved our endeavors with mental health. So I'll start with some positives. Um, I would say for me being a teenager to now, I've seen a somewhat increase of awareness. Okay, I'll say little bit more. Somewhat, it's a good chunk of awareness of mental health, what mental health is, in the way we deal with it. And I think that's a good thing. But I think we have so much to do. Good morning, Jewel. There we go. We're already cooking. Good morning. Good morning. Um, but with that being said, I'm going to actually focus being inside the house today. What we mean by inside the house, we're going to be talking about the church and mental health. Um, because I still feel when I hear a lot of conversations around me that mental health is almost a stigma, if you would, um, in the faith community, in our Christian community. Um, I personally, being a person who has um, learned to manage anxiety, learned to walk in a very beautiful life of victory over anxiety, have been a victim at the same time of people in conversations that were probably not the most beneficial for me when I was going through such a hard time with anxiety. A lot of people's like, well, if you have more faith, you will be going through this. I mean, whatever um, you're thinking, I probably heard it, unfortunately. And then we got ableism. When it comes to, that's like such a broad spectrum, you know, where you got people with different walks, different disabilities, so forth on. And there's even kind of a absence on how to interact with that demographic in the church as well. And so that's where I want to start. But what I want us to do is, because I don't want these certain terms like these isms, which I've been doing every week. I want my buddy Tierra. How you doing, man? By the way, you looking so good. I want you to just give us a, if you would, I know it's gonna be hard to do. I won't say a blanket statement of what ableism is, but enough for them to understand, and also um, enough for us so they can have this conversation if they've seen it or not. So I'll go ahead and have you explain what ableism is real quick.
Yeah. So, good morning, everyone. Ableism is a set of practices or beliefs that intentionally or unintentionally, depending, devalue and discriminate against people with physical, intellectual, or psychiatric mental disabilities. And it usually is kind of grounded in this idea that people with disabilities need fixing or saving, or that they are kind of should be overly cared for or underly cared for, like these different kind of assumptions about someone's living experience based on their variations in their ability. And so it results in often the discrimination against differently abled persons or disabled persons based on their disability. And it's rooted in a lot of assumptions about what is considered a normal human body and what should be the function of a normal human body.
Hmm.
And so it's a part of promoting kind of prejudice against individuals with disabilities, whether invisible or visible. And I guess that's where kind of talking about mental health comes in, right? Severe mental health conditions can be considered a part of the invisible disabilities, right? Things that people struggle with on a regular basis that people have you can't see just by looking at a person. That also includes like chronic pain, and it also can include like learning disabilities and different things. And then there's also the actual physical disabilities, right? That you can, I guess, see, or we assume that you can see and know just by looking at a person.
Hmm.
But so ableism is about that. It's about all of these different prejudices and discriminations that are targeted to disabled persons or differently abled people based on their conditions.
Hmm. Man, beautifully said and very accurate, very detailed. So, with that being said, let's start inside of the church. And I'm pretty sure we'll end up working out into what the world views it as, starting here. Like I always start off, personal experience, personal experiences of it being in the church first. Have you seen it? Um, and first off, are we loving those? Are we doing our best to care for those who have a various spectrum of your mental health, disabilities? How have we seen these individuals be treated, and what can we do to do better? So how have we seen these individuals be treated? So I want to hear your personal experiences, and what can we do to do better? And I'm gonna start there because there's so much I want to talk about in this conversation. I will go ahead and say before you guys, as you guys are pondering and thinking about those questions, as well as our chat. This is for you too, chat. I want to hear from you personally. I want you to open up, think about your mind and your experiences. I want, if you're a person who has had experience, that means you're the person that you had a negative experience, maybe a positive, because maybe life is not about negatives, but you had a positive. I want to hear from you as well, chat. Um, I am a well, it's I've been a special needs para for a total of 4 years, if I add it up. Probably actually five, because I first started on a bus and I was working with special needs kids. So, um, but I kind of have more genetic kids, and the reason why I'm using these words and these terms is because this is how we use them in schools. And I'm gonna go ahead and tell you right now, I really don't like these words. But for the sake of conversation, I see Tara. I'm going to refer to it this way, and I might actually just stop altogether. But first off, when we talk about in school, gen ed means general students, general education students, and special needs also obviously means special needs. Um, and I've been doing this for a total of 5 years. On the bus, I didn't interact with a lot of special needs kids as much as I thought I would. And I'll be honest with you, I was scared that first year that I would. And when I did, it was a beautiful scenario. I had one kid who loves to listen to music. It was incredible. Ended up getting attached to him real quick. Fast forward, my biggest introduction to the population of so many different behavior spectrums and special needs and autism and so forth on was when I worked at Laridan. And I didn't know what Laridan was. I just knew it was going to be another job working in the school because I always just liked working in school since I was like in the age of 20. And in short, they was like, yeah, this is you're gonna be working with kids who have autism, who have different behavior, um, they call them issues or behavior struggles, and your job is to help them rehabilitate to get them back to regular school, gen ed schools. And I'm like, oh snap, I don't know if I'm ready for that. And I'll tell you why, 'cause I was very shallow. Okay, I was one of those people who fell in this negative category of looking at this demographic of people with, I won't say a lot of animosity, but definitely a lot of ignorance. And so, when I started the job, obviously I was like, I don't want to do this, and God dealt with me viciously. He was like, these are human beings. These are not some sub human beings. These are human beings, real emotions, real feelings. And you're saying you want to do ministry. These are the least of these. These are people who don't have advocates, people who will never have anyone probably defend them because they have an idea what they think normal is already. And what do you want to do now? And obviously, God pricked my heart. And from there, 2 powerful years working with kids. I'm currently now a special needs para, and it's been nothing but a blessing. I love all of my kids, but the things I see in the high school um, could break your heart between staff and the lack of understanding that staff have towards my kids and the population that's inside of their own school will make you sometimes feel like God, um, may you have mercy. And so the reason why I'm bringing that up is because that's where I'm going to be coming from a lot for myself when I open up have these conversations is a everyday world of how people who have disabilities, people who have mental health are categorized, they're marginalized, and how these terms actually keep us from doing what people say they're not doing, which is isolating others. And so now that you have time to think, let's go ahead and start. Let's see. I want to start on the top. Maybe I'll be nice since I was talking so much. Maybe I'll start on the bottom and we'll work our way up. So that means T, you're on my right real time
Mm.
for me. And then we'll work our way up.
Yeah. Okay. So the question was specifically in the church, right? Like,
Yes.
have we seen this in the church?
Have we seen it?
Whew. So I think that, as y'all know, I tend to start large and go
Mm,
small.
right. Go
So
backwards today a little bit.
we're probably gonna do that again today. So I think there's like um, we typically identify like three kind of strands of analysis or like levels that formulate ableist beliefs, right? One is the medical, which is where disabilities are what we call pathologized, right? They're made to be something that is bad or needs to be fixed or needs to be treated or needs these kind of special circumstances. Um, then we have one of the biggest ones is on the moral level,
Mm.
where it's assumed that like people with disabilities have them because they did something wrong. And this, a lot of people's justification comes from for this idea comes from the Bible. A lot of people try to use like the discourse around sin and illness in the Bible as justification for like why we can still say today that, oh, disabilities are born from people's sins or
Okay.
from immoral behavior, right? Um, and so I think that's a big one that we definitely need to address because that's something that I think carries over both explicitly to mental health, right? And the way that a certain conditions are actually like considered, as we talked about on a previous stream, to be like the work of demons or spirits,
Mm.
right? Um, but also the way that like actual conditions are considered to be the work of um, generations of sin or whatever, right? So this way that like sin and demons and spirits become ways of explaining people's different experiences. I think like, and that's actually specifically within the church, but it's also extends to something that has had lasting effects on like just society in general. Like to this day, a lot of villains in TV shows are often depicted as having disabilities. Like
Mm.
Scar from The Lion King is literally defined by his disability, Scar,
Mm.
right? Captain Hook is literally defined by his disability, right? And so it carries
Mm.
over into both, and that comes over like explicitly from the church and from rhetoric within the church. So that's a really big one for me. And then I think the other one that like on the more practical level is that like is the social level, right? Is that part of the reason that so many people with disabilities experience discrimination, experience prejudice, is because it's not made to be a kind of normal experience, right? We don't assume, we're not taught to think that there are natural variations in humans, right? And so because of that, there aren't like institutional accommodations, right? Like these things are not made normal. Examples include like just having ramps instead of stairs, right? Or including subtitles on television, right? Or like little or in a church setting, right? Like on your power on your videos and on everything that you promote online, right? Like these different spaces, or making sure that your content materials are accessible to like visually impaired, right?
Mhm.
Or adding explanations of like the imagery that you include on your images when you post on social media, like all of these like little things that can be done to acknowledge that humans have different abilities are largely absent from churches.
Mm.
And so like I think this is one of those things where like silence on the matter becomes the norm, right? It becomes something that is taboo, something that we can't talk about, um, and is really dangerous considering that 20% of the population has some disability, right? So this is one of the largest like minority groups in the states, and like most churches, I feel like don't actually have like the necessary resources to ensure that these individuals are able to fully participate.
Mm. You said so much, and I got so much to say, but we're gonna keep going because we're definitely about to start this pod team bit. Um, Miss Dr. Peggy, I'll go have you go next, if that's okay with you. Mm.
Sure. Yeah, I'm glad Tiara went first because you brought up so many really good points that are true of disabilities overall and also for mental health. 1 in 5 American adults is diagnosed with a mental illness or
Mm.
diagnosable. So your stats, are similar for disabilities overall and mental health. And yet, more than half of people with mental illness don't receive help for their disorder. And I think a lot of that is due to stigma and due to the barriers that you mentioned, Tiara, just the public stigma, the institutional stigma. So, not only things like ramps and interpreters and captions, but also really what's the environment? How is the institution set up to receive people who maybe have panic attacks or who are depressed or who are hearing voices? How do we perceive them? And you use that word pathologize. We can pathologize even ordinary behaviors and make assumptions that someone, well, they must be crazy, or they're delusional, or they're a basket case. Even just our language is so derogatory. But it could just be that maybe, and this is a problem I have at church these days as I'm getting older, the music is just way too loud, and all the flashing strobe lights are very, very disturbing. And so I might look agitated and anxious at church. You might see me talking to myself because I'm just kind of frustrated that it's hard to worship when the music is so loud. It's hurting my ears and my heart is thumping, and strobe lights are giving me a migraine. And so you might see behavior that you look at her and say, well, what's wrong with her? She must be a nutcase. And so rather than someone saying, are you okay? I notice you look in distress. What can I do to help? Especially an usher or someone whose job, congregational care, is there to care for the congregation, but because of stigma, because of ignorance, because of pathologizing what you see through a lens, that's a stigmatized lens, a person wouldn't be well received at church, where that should be the one place. Apostle Anthony and I have talked about this before, when I've talked about mental health. The one place we should be able to go when we're struggling with mental health challenges should be the church. The one place we should be able to go and be received, if nowhere else in our day-to-day life, should be the church. And so I would love to see every single church be trained in mental health first aid, for example, and various programs that come out through the National Alliance on Mental Illness around breaking stigma. I would love to see every church receive that kind of training, so that we can have compassion and not stigmatize people that are struggling. Like you said, if it's 1 in 5, more than 1 in 5, 1 in 4 have a mental illness or mental health challenge or disability. I used to joke when I was teaching abnormal psychology. 1 in 5 people has a mental illness. Check 4 friends. If they're okay, it must be you. So there, but for the grace of God go I. With those kind of statistics, the people who have the stigmatizing behavior towards others, one day it'll probably be you if you live long enough. So we really have to, the church especially, I think, needs to take a good look at ourselves and how we're receiving others.
Amen. Ooh, it's gonna be good today. Love it, love it, love it, ladies. All right, man, gentlemen, coming down the home stretch. So I'm gonna start with Anthony, Apostle Anthony for me, but Anthony.
Yeah. Yeah, this is I think it's an important conversation. And what I've seen is just a lack of education and empathy. So number one, education. As you, TC, Pastor TC, I've worked with special needs in the schools, and so um, was able to, be up close and and I'm a person that I think, I don't know if it's natural, but I'm an empathetic person, and so when I'm dealing with people who are different, I've gravitate towards being sensitive to what I'm seeing and how to meet their needs and what to do, you know. And it was something that when I looked around, the people around me didn't have that. They were more frustrated by people with any type of special need, whether it's a mental illness, a physical, disability, or what have you. It seems so off-putting and inconvenient, and and you look around and you say, well, why did you take this job? you know, if this is such an angst for you, because this group of people needs care, and they need people that are sensitive and attentive, and it does take a very and I hate to say it, it does take a special person to do it, because everybody doesn't walk around with that. And so educating people, first of all, on what needs to be done. I love what both of the ladies said about a lot of times we don't know. We're not prepared. There's not enough trainings. As a matter of fact, just this past week was in a conversation with someone about doing a mental health for youth training. That we're going to host at some point at Shore Foundation. We're kind of working on the particulars, and so kind of this the cat's out of the bag, so to speak. We're working on that to put something together to host a few pastors that we know and bring them together and talk about how are we, dealing with mental health in our youth. How are we approaching them? How are we being attentive to them? What should we do? What are some resources that are available to us so that we can, properly care for them, and not just in the spiritual sense. Yes, we're going to pray for them. We're going to show them what Scripture says. We're going to counsel them according to the Word of God. But then there's another component that needs to be managed as well. And so, being able to educate and not dismiss certain things because it's just so different, and because it's uncomfortable or inconvenient. I think those are the areas as a pastor that I'm constantly, processing and thinking, like, are we being attentive to, people who are struggling with things? Dr. Peg, you brought up, loud music and strobe lights, and
Man.
we had an event a while back, and we were setting up lights, and we're asking, hey, can we not do the flashing lights? We can do, the fade and move lights, but can we not do the flashing light? Oh, but that sets the atmosphere. I'm like, yeah, but we have people that could have seizures, based
Mhm.
on those flashing lights. And just having an understanding, like, no, we're not, saying that you're not doing a good job. We're just saying that let's be sensitive to the environment that we're in, and the potential for people to not be able to handle, such, that flashing lights. And you see it on TV shows. It'll have up in the corner as a disclaimer that this
Mhm.
has flashing lights, could cause seizures, even on a television show. And so I think, as churches, we should have those things in place as well. Well, I like what Tiara said, and she doesn't realize that she's volunteering herself when she talks about this, to make sure that we have, our streams and things have subtitles, and
Well, I am on the
where, yes, you are.
team.
So you volunteered yourself to
Voluntold.
to
You've been
make sure that,
voluntold.
yeah, to make sure we have those things in place. Because I was sitting and listening, it's like, okay, so I hope that's on her list
Mhm.
to make sure that we have those things, so that we're up to date on those. And so that's my biggest thing is, are we educated? Do we have the proper trainings? And then are we operating with empathy? Being able to be sensitive towards the plight of others and what's going on and the people that are around us, and not just, oh, that's different, I got to get away from it. Because I've seen it over the years, and I, oh man, I don't think we did a good job there. When this person came in, did we handle that as best as we could? And so trainings, education, on this subject does need to be leveled up, I think, in the church as a whole.
Mm. All right, man. Man with a beautiful, lovely beard. Hello, sir.
Um,
Mr. Joe.
so it's a weird thing, right? Because I started off my journey on one side of this conversation, and then have found my way over to the other side of this conversation. Being somebody who has been diagnosed with bipolar and I've seen the systematic handling, for better and for worse, of the church as far as that goes, and then to be on not just the pastor side of it, but being a certified clinical professional, it changed my perspective in certain ways. I'm gonna grab a couple of the threads that y'all have put out there and kind of put some things together here. Um, Tiara, I think you were the one who talked about what has become normative as far as how we handle these things, and as a church culture wide angle view, corporate church, if you will. Um, I think the lack of formalized education, and I mean that specifically, professionals teaching folks how to handle this well, um, has laid the groundwork for things like, it could look like over spiritualizing it, right? You have a spirit of such and such, and so then you just have you're just afraid and you just need to overcome in the Lord. And the Lord can do a great many things, don't get me wrong, but anxiety disorder is also a thing.
Uh
And so it could look like just straight out dismissing. Invisible illnesses are a thing. My wife and I both handle, hers is entirely different than mine, but both of us have experienced what it looks like, that if you look at us, you would not, it's not like an overtly physical ailment, but there's very real issues going on, but because you can't see it, it's not real. And that education piece that keeps coming up, I think, is the key ingredient as to why so many other things have become normative. And it is so easy to just blow right past. For the sake of the worship environment, we're going to have music and sharp noises and the light shows and all of that kind of stuff. We're just going to have this, and oh, we're fine. We're fine because one of our entrances, doesn't have steps. So we've got it all covered. We've addressed anything regarding special needs or different things like that, where I really like, the further I get on every angle of this thing, the more I see a desperate need for churches to budget out for training courses for key people within the church. I understand the age old issue is pastors have no time. They're already stretched thin. I get that. It doesn't have to be the senior pastor. It doesn't have to
Shouldn't
be
be.
exactly to that point. It shouldn't be.
Mhm.
Find key people that you can equip and empower to be able to be the people that are receiving this training.
Or hire
And
someone.
or
And can I interject here, Pastor TC? Excuse me, Pastor Joe. Um, this was one of my passion projects when I lived in Colorado, trying to get churches and church leadership. If it's not me, get somebody else to come in, because I love what you said. Have professionals,
Mm.
clinical professionals, train the leadership and ideally the congregation. That's why I'm a big fan of mental health first aid, because it is training lay people. You're more likely to encounter someone having a mental health crisis than you are having a heart attack,
Mm.
but more people are trained in CPR than they are in how to recognize someone as
Mm.
suicidal.
Mm.
right.
And so let's talk about why there's so much resistance from church leadership to bring in trained professionals, qualified professionals, to talk about these issues and to train the leadership at the very least. Can we train the ushers and the security team at least, if no one else? Why is there so much resistance when someone like me is even willing to volunteer my time? I have offered
Right.
to do it for free, and I can't I couldn't get anyone to even let me come in for free. I live in Virginia now, and I've reached out to a couple of churches. They're too busy with other priorities, even when I'm offering to do it for free, because that's how important I think it is, that I'm willing to donate my expertise for free. Can someone help me understand the resistance to having leadership in the congregation trained, specifically because it's my area of expertise in mental health awareness? And Tiara, you can speak about
Oh man.
disabilities overall,
What
but what's the resistance?
I
Please.
think Dr. Peg won't let it rip. I
Yes,
think
thank you. Thank you.
Did I do it calmly and
Yes,
respectfully?
yes.
Okay.
Because if
And
you,
can I say this caveat? There are some awesome churches and leaders in Colorado that I've encountered who have a understanding of mental health, who have a heart for equipping the body, and who have brought me in and paid me. Not everyone wants you to do it for free. Some people do value your expertise. So I'm not saying across the board. I've encountered some awesome leadership in Colorado. I lived there for almost 20 years, is why I'm using Colorado as an example. So it's not everyone, but yeah, it's super hard to give it away for free. So what's that about?
Joe, is this where I use my gadgets?
yes, boys. I'm sorry, I'm like so
Well done.
excited. Yes,
Well done.
Okay, producer. Nope.
yes. Can I go?
T, can I
No.
grab the ball and roll?
We're about to rock paper
Um,
scissors. Go ahead, man. Go ahead. I was like, dude, go ahead.
so I just want to bolster Dr. Peggy's point from
Yes.
the East Coast perspective. So I'm in Pennsylvania, and I too have tried to volunteer my time to train people and have been met with so much resistance. And you use this word, and I'm glad you use this word, priority,
Mhm.
because
Mm,
it's not that, if you press church leadership. And again, I'll throw the same caveat that Dr. Peggy threw. I have encountered churches that do take this seriously, that this is something that is of priority. So no, we're not going straight across the board. But the reality is that this stigma, this normative behavior towards dismissing this aspect of something that somebody can endure doesn't just pop up out of nowhere. It tends to be institutionalized from the top down, and generally is part of a cycle where it's started from the top down because that person who is in the front of the room was filling a pew prior to going to the front of the room, and it was already instilled in them. And
mm,
so the cycle had already been in play before they even hit the pulpit. And so, for a variety of reasons that are kind of ingrained into the Western thought and the Western mindset, it's this idea that we don't need to give priority to this. So anybody trying to highlight it, they're not needed because this isn't a priority, because all somebody needs to do is pray more, all somebody needs to do is get closer to God, all somebody needs to do is just fix this behavior, get rid of this evil spirit, and suddenly they no longer have the need for the mental care aid or professional or anything like that. Thus the training is not needed. That's generally, to speak from my experience and the resistance that I've seen, that's generally the directionality that I've seen.
Mm.
Chat, just to wake you guys up. Um,
mm.
First off, Dr. Peggy's dropping hot fire. Okay, that's what we say
That's
here.
my hard question.
Okay,
I'm trying to hold
so,
trying to hold my tongue.
Nope.
you go ahead and be you, ma'am.
You know,
Okay.
the other connected topic that I've had a lot of resistance, and I want to bring this up because I think there's a stigma that makes us think they're connected when they're not always connected. But the other topic is, because it's another area of expertise of mine, is violence prevention and church
Mm,
safety, like shootings at
Mhm.
churches, preventing
Oh yeah, yeah.
stabbings and
mhm,
shootings and violence at churches, and recognizing signs of indicators for violence. And there's a lot of resistance to that type of training as well. They'll round up the men and have a security team, but then they won't actually train them in prevention, violence prevention, and recognizing signs that someone is moving on a pathway to violence. And yes, there is sometimes an overlap with signs of serious mental illness, someone who is psychotic or severely depressed and decides to take out a bunch of other people and then kill themselves. Yes, we do see that overlap, but it's a myth that mentally ill people are more violent. They're more likely to be a victim of
mm,
crime than a perpetrator of violence. But if we could recognize the signs of escalating violence, recognize the signs of a mental health crisis, we would be doing well to keep the church safe, the church body safe. And there's a lot of resistance and denial about that. We'll just pray. And of course, we should pray and go under the wings and the shelter and the shadow and of God. And yes, it's both, like you mentioned, Joe. It's the natural and the supernatural. Yes, of course we pray, and there's some things in the natural. But I even would challenge. I sometimes churches don't even really have a vibrant
Mm.
prayer
Mm,
life, corporate
Sure.
prayer
Yeah.
culture. So they're saying, well, we're going to pray about it and put our head
Mhm.
in the sand and
right.
not do anything in the natural. But I actually don't even see them really praying about
Mm.
it either. So, what
Yeah.
are we
well,
doing?
That's two. She let two bombs drop right
okay,
out the.
okay,
So,
okay, okay. So I'm gonna back up because man, that is a rabbit trail that we will get stuck on. But they're kind of somewhat a little bit connected. I
Mhm.
want to go back a little
Mhm.
bit because you asked why. Why is there so much resistance? And I believe we're kind of hearing it. And Chad, I want to hear why you think there's so much resistance for like talking about mental health and having training, having at least our leadership trained to have these conversations. Why is there so much opposition? I want to hear from you, Chad. I'm gonna go ahead and get in this. Well, I think there was a program I was in, and it became very obvious to me why these conversations are not being had. And there was a certain material we had, a book, and I won't even mention the book because I don't. My goal is never to be an advocate for hostility. Neither am I a person who wants to ignore what the problem is either. So I understand controversy can be a thing when you talk about issues like this. When I was reading this book about wellness, spiritual wellness, and God wanted this type of spiritual wellness. It's very clear that things like anxiety, depression, and any other disability are is heavily frowned on, and God wants you delivered from them, all of them, and that God wants you healed. So we use these type of words and buzzwords like healing, deliverance. It is heavily assumed that anything with a disability is already demonized, excuse me, and that it's a problem.
Mhm.
And so with that being said, there is a whole I didn't want to do it, but there's a whole culture that we're still part of in the church that is prosperity driven, and there's money
Yeah.
behind prosperity, and the whole prosperity
yep.
and that type of ministry is healing you from those things, which brings, where we want to talk about or not, residual income.
Mhm.
People flocking to churches to get healed from something that society has already said is a problem. And so the church now partners with that And therefore we're like, yeah, this is wrong, and we have the answer, or we have the person who is the answer. Now, am I saying that God cannot heal? Absolutely. And I want to make that a statement that's even being pushed. Am I saying that we should not be praying for these things? Again, we said this so far. Absolutely, we should be praying, but are we actually doing it? I think the problem is that we get into doctrine. It's taught that you shouldn't have these things. So if you have these things are wrong. So why would I teach on these things? Why would I get people to teach my leadership when we're trying to actually sometimes maybe capitalize off of this, or at times we're actually trying to just ignore that this is not something that could be even normal, because we keep using the word normalize in a in a church culture. We don't want it to be normal. My experience, again, I hate to go off of my experience, is that this is a problem. This should be fixed. God should be doing something about this. You don't have this condition. You'll speak that over your life. Okay, can I use some churchanese up in here? You don't speak that you have anxiety over your life. You don't have anxiety disorder. You are a victor. You do have peace in the name of Jesus, all these things are true. I do have peace. But these things is who you're not none of these things. So those diagnoses are wrong, and you're not supposed to have those things, and we're not going to have that in the household of faith. And so yeah, there's a pushback on it, because yeah, we don't want you to accept that there could be something wrong. That it is crazy. You would think with the surge of pastors who've committed suicide, right? I'm gonna go ahead and go here. In the various magnitude of people committing suicide in the church, you would think someone say, well, there has to be something wrong with that statement. This can't be all just name it, claim it, pray over it. We have to do something more. But again, I don't know. I think you got to think about capitalism. People want to profit in the business of trying to make it better, not actually talk about it.
I
Yeah.
think you hit the nail directly on the head. Sorry, Tiara, and then I'll kick it over to you. It's far more profitable to have a congregation full of people who are healed and delivered and happy and wealthy and all of that kind of stuff. That's way more marketable
Mm.
than to have congregates that are dealing with issues, dealing with family life issues, or dealing with mental health issues, or any of those things, any all inclusive, right? And so it becomes, exactly, because if the idea is church growth, if the idea is let's get as many people in the door as absolutely possible, then we have to make our church as marketable as we possibly can be. And I understand that comes across as very cynical. And you know what? It wouldn't be the first time that I've been accused of being a little on the cynical side. It is what it is. But just because it's cynical doesn't mean that it's not factual. Sorry, T, go for it.
That's what I was gonna say. I was like, that's the other side of the prosperity gospel, right? It's the one that there's a side that like actually encourages people to be about your business and get money and to be prosperous, right? But the other side is that you have to sell the gospel,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so, like Joe was saying, right, that means that you know you can't compromise your testimony.
Mm-hmm.
And for a lot of people, having a these experiences is considered compromising or tainting your testimony, because how are you going to sell me this quick fix to my issues in life when you still have issues, right? So kind of just building off of that. But I think the other thing is like this is one of those moments where like people really underestimate the fact that like churches, when they're built, like when people start churches, most of them don't come in and say, okay, what is the right way to do this?
Mm-hmm.
Right? They often come in with the baggage that they had, the ideologies that they had outside of the church, and they just bring them in. Right. And so, just like in the world, when you go to a movie theater, right? The flashing lights is a disclaimer, right? Suggesting that it's on the individual to determine whether they can handle it or not, and not the actual person that made the film, right?
Mhm.
People bring in that same kind of bias when they come into the church and found a church, right? And so it becomes then about, oh, it's not my job to accommodate these people.
Mm.
It becomes about, oh, that is an individual problem. If you can't see, it's up to you to go and pick
Mm.
a seat that you can see in, right? If you have chronic pain, it's up to you, right, to actually come when you're not in pain, or to make or let people know that you won't make it, or all these other things, right? It makes it very much like an individual issue, right? As opposed to seeing it as, okay, well, how do we create a space where all differently abled people, all of these variations in the human living experience, right, are equally valued, right? And there's space for all of it, right?
Mm.
And I think that's the big thing that people like don't really acknowledge. Like, I think, and I love that we're talking about this idea of like kind of the normative, right? Because I was listening to this podcast the other day, and she gave a great example of like a kind of disability that like people are actually totally okay with and doesn't get pathologized the same way, is glasses, right? Like
Hmm.
contact lenses that is a visual impairment that people walk around with all of the
Hmm.
time, but no one, it doesn't get the same kind of exclusion, the same kind of marginalization, the same kind of condemnation that all of these others get, right? And that's partly because society has made that normative, right?
Mhm.
It's
Right,
fashion,
Yeah,
and
exactly. It's
they can
okay.
sell you 20 pairs
it's
of different
marketable.
style glasses in
Exactly.
every
It just
color.
shows that part of
Wow.
this is not just about like, okay,
Wow.
these individuals need to like take care of themselves, or we need to fix them, because that's often what happens, right? We got to fix them, we got to save them, this kind of language. But like when we actually just provide resources and make it available for these individuals to like participate fully and not question it, right? But also like promote it, enable it, right? Like make it a part of this process, that it actually is possible to like take away the stigma, right? It is possible to actually make
Mhm.
this happen. And so I think that's partly what happens with the church, is the church does not
Yeah.
even consider that, because we come in and we assume that just because we're a church now, we're new, we're brand new,
Mm.
right?
Mm.
We're outside of now the ideology of the world, we're outside of these different social issues, and that's not true. You're just bringing them
Mm.
in and repackaging them with a ribbon, right?
Mm.
Unless you
Mm.
actually interrogate them.
Mm.
Mm.
So there's a concept in education called universal design for learning, UDL. And it the premise is, what would help someone with a learning disability or a learning difference probably would help every
Mm.
Right.
student learn better.
Mhm.
So captions, might be for someone who's hard of hearing, but captions would help someone else who can hear, because it's their hearing and reading. Or having a larger font would be good for someone with a visual impairment. But for me, as I'm getting older, larger fonts and brighter lights to read, I can't even read anything in the
Mhm.
dark anymore. As long as it's not a strobe light flashing, I need a bright light. So, universal design for learning says whatever would help one student with a learning need or challenge probably would help everyone. So instead of just isolating the one student who needs an accommodation in your classroom and they go off to a testing center to have a quiet environment with no distractions and extra time, well, why not give
Mm.
every student a quiet environment with no distractions and
Right.
ample time? So it really helps you to say, what am I really measuring here by having a timed test, that if someone gets anxious, they can't even demonstrate what
Mm.
they really know just because of the pressure of the time. So, how else can I measure what students know without this arbitrary, artificial time limit, and give every student double time if that's the accommodation for a particular student who has a disability? So, I wonder how we could use that concept even at
Mm.
church. If this would help someone in a wheelchair, or help someone with a vision impairment, or help someone with bipolar disorder, maybe it might be helpful to everybody in
Right.
some way. And again, it's more inclusive rather than saying, yeah, if this is such a common occurrence of part of our human condition, why are we segregating it out and trying to pray it away? And yes, we should receive our
Mm,
healing, all of us, but make the environment more welcoming and
Yeah.
accommodating for
And
all.
just
mm,
to add on to
mm.
that, right? I
Yeah.
think part of that is too how we talk about these issues. And you knew TC I was going to come for it, and I know you
I
use
know.
that language because it's what you use at school, right?
Right.
It's what they teach you. But like euphemisms
Hmm.
like special needs or
Mm,
oh she's just different or she's just whatever, right? Like are also actively a part of the problem, right?
hmm.
Because they again make it that this is not a part of the normal human experience, right? So this is a category of people who are all just need to be cut off to themselves, right? Need to be not included or not. And I think that's the other thing that comes up explicitly in the church, that they need to not tamper with the experience of everybody else,
Oh my
right?
God.
Is that they're like when I think about like people who have kind of bladder issues, right, or like these kinds of medical conditions that often go unseen, right? Like a big thing is like, oh, you can't move around at certain times during service because you're going to
Mm,
distract other people. But if you have a medical
mm,
condition, what does that mean for you, right? It means that like the responsibility again is on you to make accommodations for yourself of when
Mm,
and how and where, or you just don't come, right? And so like I think that going back to this idea of like language and dealing with that, how we talk about this as like where how do we make this more about like this is a part of our shared experience as humans and not
mm,
one person's solo struggle. And like language like that, like special needs or like um kind of anything that like these euphemisms that infantilize, because that's the other thing, right? It also makes it seem like oh
mm,
they are less than, like oh like these are like kids that we need to take care of, when a lot of times, I mean in your case if it's at a school they might actually be children, but like if they're adults, right, because the same language is used for adults too who are still in these same kind of
mm,
categories. And then the idea of like having to rehabilitate them, right, like as if like that there's something inherently broken about how they interact with the world, when it's actually the world that hasn't allowed them to interact, right? As
oh.
opposed to it being about, oh, like they need to accommodate, they need to change to best match us. Like, why is this the case that we don't actually allow for them to experience the world as they experience it, right? Like, why are we requiring them to become, to use that phrase, a square peg when they're a
mm,
triangle peg? Like, why don't we just have a bigger pegboard? like,
See,
mhm.
I gotta get these comments because
Mhm.
Tier, you're hitting something that yeah. First off, James, good morning. Good
Pastor
morning, sir.
James.
The church has fallen victim to the facade of perfection. Absolutely. Absolutely.
yeah.
And I'm going to go back to that in a second. That's probably going to be one of the points I make. Good morning. And yes, good morning, Tina, by the way. Good morning, and yes, it makes things much easier to have closed captions. Tina, I am with you.
I
And I
agree.
love them. I love how you can just make them beautiful colors and things like that. Me and my wife become caption fans. We put them
Can
on our
I take
YouTube
credit for
videos. Yeah.
that?
Yeah. Thank you. I love
Yes,
those
let me take
captions.
credit for that because when I came back from China, like y'all, I
Mm-hmm.
couldn't. English was hard. Like all of
Mm-hmm.
a sudden, I couldn't like
Mm,
make out distinguish. I couldn't distinguish between like people's accents. It was rough. So closed captions became a natural part of me listening and watching the TV. And I remember the resistance I got. Every
Oh my
household I
God.
went to, they were like, why do we got these letters on the screen? I can't read and watch at the same time. I can't do this and do this. And now it's like, oh, actually, this is so much better.
Yeah.
Like whether whether it's TC's house or my own, the Wilson house, right? Like even now I got my grandma uses them now. The Campbells have it. Like I've just been going to these houses because when I need to watch it,
Converting people.
on. And now
Hmm.
everybody's like, this is actually this is better
Yeah.
for us. And so I just want to take credit for that real quick.
Yeah, 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 I'll let you have that. I love captions. Um, and Tina also says the
I
father.
love it. You guys are so great.
Yes. Yes.
I was like,
Yes.
who invented the kids?
Got the
And that was
buttons.
I had no
Oh
idea
my
what was
God, I'm
happening
so
at first.
happy. I'm so happy, bro. Okay, listen, we have to talk about that later because I got so many things now. She said the father's heart. Tiara, you're talking about the school system and youth and learning, and so are you, Dr. Peggy. You're talking about um, joint learning and really trying to breed this idea that really we all have somewhat these barriers of learning, period. And when one child is successful in learning, it can actually bring success to another child as well. I even wager for adults, of course. And hang on real quick. Tina says it's because I'm not deaf, or however, it's just clearly the clarity of words. Absolutely, I agree. It's someone who a little bit of a younger guy, not too young, but I either, what I'm saying. I like them too because I like to be able to understand. 'Cause I'm a person that I actually have to slow things down a lot of times to understand what's being said. And so having words on the screen helped me out as well. And I'm a big fan of it. And also being a YouTuber, they push it heavily. It's part of the algorithm. You're more successful to be, you know, YouTuber. You have some captions, So I'll be honest with you, but all of that helps me out as well. But like I was saying to those points earlier, we are talking about, it's heartbreaking because in school, our teachers are not equipped to deal with our kids, who are kids in my world. They're not special needs kids. They are kids who have real issues, like I have real issues when I was a kid, who have just as much of heartbreak and things going on in their life, and they come to school to learn. And yeah, it's sometimes I feel like it's incriminable, incriminable, wow, it's not a word, criminal of how you're just sitting in these classes as a para and you're like, man, any day, you know, this teacher's going to come over and make the accommodations. But then it becomes my job to make the accommodations, which is also not in my job description. But someone who loves my kid, I'm not going to let the kid just sit there and just be a fly on the wall just to get some credits. Because then it's about numbers. Well, we have to put them here because, they need these credits to go to graduate so they can get into another program where they do the same thing, where there's really no learning, but now we have a space for this kid, right? And it's just heartbreaking because I'm like, the whole purpose of going to school is to learn, no matter who you are. Well, I bring this to the church as well. This mentality of it's not my responsibility is crippling, and no pun intended. It's I think when you said that, Tara, because you said out your mouth, like, yeah, that's on the person, not me. And for me, I think Tara she took the words out of my mouth. I'm like, yeah, what if we actually, instead of changing the piece, while we change the whole box, the whole game? Why are we not thinking like that? Jesus came here on earth to change the world. He didn't say, I'm gonna make the peace do the work to get your salvation. You need salvation, you figure it out. Go ahead, figure it out. Oh, you actually need direction. I don't have to tell you. I'm sorry that you can't comprehend my godly intellect, mortal. Why don't you go ahead and figure it out? No, he came down. He dwelled in human flesh. This is who Jesus is, right? He dwelled in human flesh, and he walked with us. He suffered with us and suffered ultimately. This is our God. This is what he did. So the concept for us as Christians should be the same. It should be, how do we have, how would the Holy Spirit give us such a deep level of compassion and empathy to say that we're going to get in and we're going to change it up? This is
TC.
how we're going to approach us starting a church. This is how we're going to approach our ministries, that we're going to be that voice. Because you see this in the Bible. You and it's crazy. You see that God's always crying out for justice, for those who are less fortunate, for those who have disability, for those who are oppressed and abused. He doesn't say they need to fix it. He says, no, we're going to fix things around them so they can be a part of this family.
Amen. TC, can I jump in for just a second?
Go ahead, man.
I want to ask this question before I forget it. Um, because you said something that kind of triggered a thought for me, that, are there situations, and this is for everybody, everybody, on the panel, everybody in the comments, are there situations where someone's disability can trigger someone else's, you know,
Mhm.
maybe anxiety, right? And we overlook the fact that possibly a person with an anxiety disorder is actually triggered by someone with a disability, that they begin to, struggle because of someone else's disability. It where what do we do in those situations if, that's the case? Because I think sometimes it happens and we don't really notice that that's what's happening, versus, someone just not wanting to deal with someone because they have some type of disability. What if they actually are struggling with anxiety and this person's disability is triggering that? And so just something to throw out there, and just to get your thoughts, on what do you guys think about that?
Got to take a poke at it, and I'm pretty sure, Dr. Peggy's man, she's probably well versed in this one. But this is what we do in class. We have kids with different disabilities, and can different disabilities spike different disabilities? Absolutely. I'll go ahead and say yes. Just out of experience working in this field, but we don't separate those kids. And somebody say, "What? You don't separate them?" No, we work with those kids on how to be themselves around their peers. And as a staff, it's our responsibility to cultivate that environment so that both students feel like they can coexist together. They may not agree with each other. We might have to tell Timmy, I'm just using words, that, hey, when you do this, this causes this. We have a culture in our classroom where we're not afraid to talk to Timmy. When you do this, Diana does this. Diana, however, it's not okay for you to hit Timmy when you feel this happening. There's sensory tools, there's things that we have in our classroom that our kids can grow and be successful. So hey, you know what, Diana, you need a break, because yeah, Timmy's bothering me. Okay, Diana, there's a break room. I'll give you 5 minutes. After 5 minutes, I'm gonna come and check on you, and we're gonna come back. And then what we start to see is that Timmy and Diana work together very well. You might even see a Timmy start helping on Diana when Diana needs help in class. Why am I bringing this up? I think it's the same thing in church. If we don't ever talk about it, if we're not even equipped to even know if a Timmy and a Diana have set disability, we can't even get Timmy and Diana in the church to coexist together, to be one, the way Christ desired, because there's no way to even educate them that, first off, what they have is their disability is okay, that they're not exempt. If the people who are responsible for them, who love them, who are also their peers, then yeah, that's the case. You see people, yes, they bow out. You'll see them around, and they feel like they don't belong because they don't know how to respond because they're going through what they're going through. So yes, I think first off, against the whole problem that we're having is people got to be equipped to have those conversations. Those conversations must be had, and those people, those individuals must understand how to coexist together. I'm pretty sure I butchered a lot of that, but I'm pretty sure Dr. Peggy and a lot of you guys could probably say it like way better. So I'm interested to hear what you guys say on this one, Dr. Peggy, personally.
Yeah. I love what you shared. And, Apostle Anthony used the word empathy earlier. It
Mhm.
really is about trying to step into someone else's shoes and see how they're feeling and how it affects them. And it doesn't excuse bad behavior. I mean, even if you have a disability, a mental illness, a learning difference, you still have to treat people with kindness. You still can't go around punching people in the face and say, "Oh, that was my, that was my illness,
Right.
makes me punch people." So we still have to be accountable in a civil society and exhibit kindness to one another. But it's having empathy and understanding for how this must affect someone, or invite them to tell you, "I'm curious how that impacts you," so that I can show up in a way that's supportive and doesn't
Mm.
add fuel to the fire. So I think empathy is super important. And I think also sometimes people feel uncomfortable around something they don't understand, or they're I'll use depression as an example, especially someone who's depressed to the point of pondering suicide. That can be really scary for other people. It's really, really heavy to be in fellowship with someone who's chronically severely depressed.
Mm.
It's very hard to show up for someone like that, and they'll feel like no one's there for them, but it's hard to show up for someone like that day after day. And so sometimes people will withdraw from others because they really just don't know how to deal with it. They don't understand it. It makes them uncomfortable. And so I love what you're saying about teaching children. If we could teach children from a young age kindness and empathy and compassion and curiosity, and going the extra mile to help someone without being afraid or blaming them, I think that would go a long way. And so that social stigma that I think we talked about earlier, of just people become socially isolated because of various disorders or conditions or challenges, and then they put that same stigma on themselves. They'll internalize those negative stereotypes, and then can become self-fulfilling. And so they show up even more, like if a little kid is called a bully because he has an impulse control disorder, he'll internalize that, and then he'll just be sad and lonely and angry and just become
Yeah.
more of a bully. And so it becomes self-perpetuating. So I think empathy is so important, and recognizing how what gets stirred up inside of you when you're around someone in a wheelchair or who's blind. And Tiara talked about infantilizing people. Like, it should pull out some compassion and kindness, and you don't want to treat them like a child, either, if they're an adult. But I think all those things really go together. And I think about as I was reading through Job, I think about the value and importance of simply just showing up and being with people without always having something to say, without always having an opinion,
Mhm.
to
Mhm.
simply
Mm.
just be with them in their pain and suffering, and whatever their disability, however it might affect them. I think it's important to be curious when you have relationship. 'Cause sometimes people will be curious and there's no relationship, and so then you just feel like an object for their curiosity, but they're not really in relationship or wanting to have empathy. But to just be with people and allow them to struggle with whatever they struggle with. And as relationship develops, yeah, you can be curious and say, "How can I help you with this?" Or, "Does it upset you when I do this? Does it calm you when I do that? What would you like to have happen right now?" I think that's best in relationship. Otherwise, it just feels like you're a visitor at the zoo studying people. That doesn't feel good for the person who's struggling.
Yeah, I
Mm.
was thinking about how to articulate this. And I think partly, I think it comes down to, for me, um, that we need to allow people to show up as they are,
Mhm.
um, in whatever capacity that looks like. So I think that when people articulate their boundaries or their needs, a lot of times we consider that to be weakness,
Hmm.
right? Like if you say, I just don't have the emotional and mental capacity to handle this right now,
Right.
right? People often look at that as a sign of weakness, right? Of like, oh, they don't have their stuff together. They can't do this. They can't do
Mm.
that, right? And so I think that, like, I think we have to come to a point where we are able to respect and allow people to communicate that without it being a value judgment, right? Without it being about, oh, well, you're now incompetent. And I think that that's something that comes up with, like, be when we have these kind of interactions between differently able people, right? Like a lot of times, if it's about like how this particular behavior triggers one thing for me or another person, right? Then the person who is triggered should be able to say, okay, or to ask for someone else to fill in, right? Or to do something, right? As opposed to us requiring it to still fall on them. I think that, like, we have to be willing to allow, like, people in across the board in the situation, right? And that means that we can't prioritize, like, necessarily one over the other, if that makes sense. I mean, I understand that, like, if someone is in immediate danger, like physical danger, like that would make sense to prioritize that. But I think, like, when it comes down to, oh, like me having to, like, someone being really quote unquote loud in service, and for someone else that causing them to feel anxious, right? Or like causing them to feel like disturbed because someone is especially loud next to them, right? I don't think that, like, necessarily, like, we should go in and be like, okay, sit down and require them to, like, have a face to face or have an interaction. But I think that, like, we need to allow them to be able to say, okay, today I can't handle this, and that be okay, right? So I guess what I'm trying to say is that, like, even as we're talking about creating spaces for differently able people, that doesn't necessarily mean that everyone who's coming in and everyone who's invested in creating this space is going to have the same um, kind of, how do I put it, the same um, boundaries or limitations, right? Like when it comes to it, right? Like we can't force someone to take on more work or more produce more emotional labor when they're not ready to. So
Right.
I think that that's one that comes up for me. But I think that, like Dr. Peggy was saying, that part of it also is like, again, if we take away this idea of having to fix these things, right? Then I think that also takes off a lot of weight, right? Like it's not your responsibility to fix anxiety, right, in a
Right.
person, right? It is, that's not your job, right? So your job is not to go over and be like, okay, you're, let me fix you real quick, right? But you can say, how do I support you, right? Right? How do I support you? What does it look like for you right now? And I think that those, like, it can seem like a play on words, but I think they're actually different, like different motivations, right? Like one is, let me come in and save you, right? Like you need me to save you right now. And the other is like, I understand that I cannot necessarily access or share the same experience that you're having, but I want to make sure that even as you're experiencing what you are, that, like, you feel supported and you feel like I have your back, right? And so those are very different things. I think that comes up quite a bit, like in how you ask and approach people. Like if you find out that someone is struggling with anxiety or depression, does it become about, okay, um like, oh, like I know a lot of people will, like, I guess, try to check in on them every day, but it's a, like, or make them feel better, right? Like force them to feel better. Like, okay, well, if we just go get your favorite food, you'll be better. If
Mm-mm.
we just go do this, you'll be better, right? Instead of
Mm-mm.
actually being like, what do you need from me? So I think that, like, you have to have open dialogue as opposed to trying to enforce. And that's why, like, TC, your example was great, right? Because it shows that this is a work, that has to be done in progress, right? It's
Hmm.
not something that you can come in and impose, right? Like, because it's not a one size fits all, right? It actually requires you to come in and do the work and say, okay, well, for this situation, we need this, we need that. For this individual, they would, like, it's not a one size fits all kind of approach.
Yeah, and to that, and I wanted to get to Tina's comments because she dropped a lot of good comments. Excuse me. Um, yeah, it's not, and just like again, just going to stick with the classroom scenario because I see it's a lot. I have to be okay with my kid saying I don't want to. I'm not ready to do that. I don't want to be friends with Diana. I don't want Diana upsets me, and I have to be okay with saying, okay, that's fine. Thank you for using. And we say it this way. I think we because we're dealing with kids, we don't think about this like adults. Thank you for letting me know. And we're not saying that just to say it. We're actually saying, yeah, you have a right to say that you're not ready to do this,
Mm-hmm.
and and that's okay. So, not again to Pastor's question, to that person that might be saying that it's okay not to be okay. That is my favorite show and my
Favorite show,
favorite
shameless
phrase,
plug.
and my favorite phrase. Yeah, it's okay. That's fine. You know, and how can I get in here with you? And I love Dr. Peggy said this word. How can I show up for you? Oh man, when you said just like trying to be churchy, but the Holy Spirit was just like that was it. Um, yeah, because that's what it should be. And yeah, again, Tierra, man, I think you killed it when we try to go in with fixed behavior mentality. We're gonna make you two work instead of saying, no, that's fine. And how can I be there for you? Because what you might find is when you do that, that person might be more ready to actually go back and say, okay, I can do this now. And you might see some powerful stuff happen. Or here's the deal: I've seen both. That person might be like, I'm fine right here, and this is the most I can do, and not shaming that either.
Right.
Because I've also learned that because, like you said, it's a weird thing of shame that kind of happens there. Like, well, that's all you can do. Yeah, that's all I can actually do that doesn't cause me the stress more than what I have, and saying that's fine. And thank you. And thank you for and really getting in there with the person. Um let's see. I'm sorry guys, I'm being over guy. They reach for my mouse. Let me do this. There we go. Get a little bit close. Let's see.
Where are you picking up from with the
I'm gonna pick
comments?
up from when we're talking about the clarity of words. We're talking about captions. I just want to read some of these because it's just good, that Tina's is in here having this dialogue with us. Um, so like I said, the not because I'm deaf, however, the clarity of words. She said a little hearing loss in my left ears. She was saying earlier when you was talking Dr. Peggy as well. This is true. I have a cousin who's illiterate, but she still goes to church. Actually, it was you, Tier. You were talking about the captions again. Um, she said, "This is awesome." Yep, other kids have a heart to help. Yes, I mean, oh my god, my classroom just makes me like terrible a lot of times. Keeping them included makes the quality of life better for disability. Yes, you will see this, and it makes you full of joy that when you have a kid working with another kid, they're like, hey, let me show you how to do this. And then, like I said, this is in my department of quote unquote special needs. That's what I'm saying. These kids are normal. They care about their, and they even would help their other peers when we go to, I kind of like saying these words, man. They make me so mad. So I'm not. When we're in other classrooms, they make me so mad. Okay, but when we're in other classrooms, and they're around their other peers, you even see this need to help, and it's beautiful, it's powerful, and then the kids around them, their other peers they start opening up, and they're like, how can they help out? And you just have this culture where everyone's helping one another. It doesn't matter what disability or what they have going on. It's now we're peers, we're friends, we're helping each other. Powerful stuff. Yes, when someone has a disability, a person has no idea how many disabilities. Yes, again, yes, he is speaking facts. Um, this is so true. And then we got a good point, and then we got the app. So, um, Yes, man.
T, do
I
you
want to.
mind if I jump in?
Yes, because you've been quiet. I was about to pick on you. How you read my mind?
Couple of things that I want to hit on, specifically from the. I know we've been using the classroom perspective a lot, but I kind of want to shift gears to the adult perspective here for a second, and then jump back. So I want to take the teachable moment here because we've been talking about this idea of an inherent complex that we need to jump in and save people and be able to, Tiara, you use the example, if I just, if we get you your favorite food, then you'll feel better. If we just go do what you want to do, then you'll feel better, all of those kinds of things.
Mm.
One of the things that I find the most fascinating about um working in the field of trauma response and all of that kind of stuff is the sociological aspects of it, that and watching the habits and patterns of people, because the knee-jerk response for the human most of the time is, I've got to say the right thing, I've got to do the right thing, I've got to, like, there is some kind of action that I need to take in order to make this person feel better or to remedy this situation. And so for anybody who feels that burden when they are engaging with somebody else, might I take the moment to alleviate you from that burden?
Mm.
Because it's not your responsibility to immediately remedy that situation for the person and take that pain away or take that hardship away or take that moment away or anything like that. Sure, there's situations to every situation, right? Every instance has something where, yeah, maybe there is an action response situation where it's like we've used the example before of the coat, right? You find somebody who needs a coat, yeah, pray for them, but if you've got more than one coat, maybe you just give them a coat, you know what I mean, that sort of thing. So there are action response situations, but oftentimes when somebody is coming forward with bricks in their hand, all they're looking for is a moment to set the bricks down.
Mm.
Now, not everybody at all times is able to handle somebody else's bricks. That's just the reality of the situation.
Right.
But if you're in that moment and you're engaging with somebody, be be comfortable with the uncomfortable. Be Allow for the beats of the moment to just breathe and just be present with that person, because a lot of the time a person who is trying to reach out like that just desperately wants the connection with another human being, not to be fixed, not to be remedied, not to be psychoanalyzed, but to just feel a connection with another person. So I just wanted to take that moment to say, yeah, absolutely, that is something that we as humans have that instinct, especially in the culture that we live in the West, to react in that kind of way. But that burden and that responsibility is not yours. And I would go as far as to say that if you try to take that burden on, if you try to take that responsibility on, most of the time you're just going to end up doing more damage than you are good. So there's that. Um, I wanted to circle back to a comment that kind of we hit, but we just kind of ran past. And there's been several points that we've been made, including the current conversation, that kind of all kind of hit back to this. So I'm going to be the guy who goes ahead and grabs the steering wheel and takes us back into the spiritual here for a second, if you don't mind. Pastor James said the church has fallen victim to the facade of perfection. Um, So when we look at this idea of perfection and what it means to be a follower of Christ. I'm going to say something that's going to be a little spicy here for a second. So if you'll entertain me a little story time with the saints here for a second. Um, Before getting into church leadership or getting into the professional, any of that kind of stuff, I worked in advocacy programs for folks with mental health disorders. That this has been something that, because I have watched people come before me systematically mishandle some of the same diagnoses that were handed to me. I have a heart for helping people just be able to live as a whole, um as a whole person, not despite their limitations or things like that. And so we went into schools, and we went in and set up a program with a local resource center that literally all they needed to do, literally the only thing, show up, just send a representative, show up, take the training from professionals, just had to take the training. And I remember stepping into the high school that I went to. Now I'm from the public school system. And so the the we go in and we talk to them, and they just, I could tell you right now that school had no resources for anybody with mental health issues. If there weren't, it wasn't until afterwards that I learned what a para was. Um, that, like, they didn't have anything like that. You either were in, quote unquote, and I'm not, again, I'm in your, I'm in your ballpark here. I'm
Mm.
using language that the school used that
Right.
infuriates me.
Oh
But
man.
again, this is the language that they used:
Right.
normal classes or disciplinary classes. That was it. And so I remember being told by the principal, we have no need for that. And they would have gotten $500 of free credits to be able to go and do, and like, to use for different resources, different training, all of that kind of stuff. Again, we were going to hold a seminar. All the school system needed to do was send a representative, and they wouldn't do it.
Yes.
Um, Tried something similar with churches. Tried the same model. I was like, yeah, why not? That would make sense, right? Church is gonna jump all over this.
Mm.
Now, same, very, very, very similar response. Now, why do I bring that up, and why is that spicy? One is an organization that has absolutely nothing to do with the Christian context or worldview, and one is the church,
Mm.
and they're responding in the same way.
That's scary.
That is scary. And when we understand that, not only have we fallen for the facade, like Pastor James said, but we chase it.
Mm-hmm.
We chase that idea of being perfected in Christ. Now, mind you, on the other side of the veil, hallelujah, praise God, there is one day that we will not have to deal with the limitations of our flesh, of the carbon based life form. Absolutely, without a doubt. Healing, absolutely, without a doubt. All those spiritual things, absolutely, without a doubt. Completely and totally. That being said, if we lived in an existence where it was as simple as just pray away a disorder, this world would look a lot different. It
Mm.
just would.
Mm.
And so when we're conceiving of these things, and there's a part of me that wants to shout out to the church planters. And Aunt, I think you're going to get me when I'm saying this. Tierra, seriously, coming from somebody who has planted churches, not just in the States but in other countries, you got that in one. You hit that directly on the head, no bones about it. That when you plant a church, do not Do not get it twisted. You bring your own baggage into the context with you completely and totally.
Yep.
That's why you have to have people around you that are trained to be able to look for these things, people that can hold you accountable, a plurality of leadership, all of those things that because it's the entire team dynamic. And we root these things out in an effort to be able to not strive for perfection, but to create an environment that, yeah, sure, the humans are involved. It's going to be flawed and imperfect. That's just the reality of the situation. But we can at least take steps to be able to cultivate an environment that says, oh, we don't need this. We're good. We're not that this isn't a problem that plagues us, because I guarantee for anybody that's listening to this, if you are in that position where you think your congregation's got this, you don't need it, this isn't something that you guys handle, that you guys have to deal with, then I challenge you, how well do you know your congregation? Because somebody is sitting in a pew, somebody is sitting in a seat, somebody is sitting in the group, that if you honestly believe that in your heart of hearts, then that person has not shared or you're not paying attention.
Well said, man. I totally agree. Let me too. I'm gonna make sure I'm muted because I might be doing that. But well said, man. I can't agree with you enough. And when I was saying scary, because it is, that's one thing I was alluding to earlier. With my point is that it's not just marketable; it's a chase. That yeah, there is perfection in Christ. We want to be like Him, but at the same time, don't forget He died for the things that we deem imperfect, not worthy, and those things should be cared for. So it's this duality as Christians that we must have, that the world is broken, it is unfair, it is unbalanced. And if God's role is to save us from this world, and this is what I'm going to say, not necessarily fix it. And I think that's scandalous in itself, because we have a mentality that God is constantly trying to fix this world, and no, this world is passing away and perishing. So those things that we're talking about, perfection, glory, those things are for our next life. Those things are to come. While we're here, we love those who are like us, who have imperfect imbalances, who might have emotional distress that we've have and dealt with. We love on each other because then we do see Christ. But if we're trying to be perfect, then we don't need Christ, right? Then we might
Bang
overlook.
on.
I'm just saying, man. I think about this a lot, being working in the environment that I work in. I know I brought that up a lot in the stream, because it actually, I feel like this has taught me more. And in no disrespect to this, I know we're coming at the church and we're trying to grow. And when we say coming, we're not bashing. We're trying to grow as a people because we are the church. And this is something that we want to grow as a people together better in, right? But I'm telling you, I've learned so much being in this environment on how to be a pastor that I can't even begin to be grateful to God that He placed me in these environments. These environments taught me how to be more human than I ever thought I would before, you know, because I was like, man, that's the first revelation of helping me to manage anxiety was realizing that it's actually okay to be broken. It's okay to have a bad day. It's okay to be scared, and to see the kids I work with have the same issues and watch them overcome these issues daily in their life gave me strength to say that, well, surely I can too, right? And then, oh man, I didn't even get to sharing the gospel and all that other stuff in this setting, right? How powerful it is. Um, but I do have to land this plane. This plane has been a beautiful ride. Before I do the landing of the plane, chat, I want to hear from you. What are some takeaways that you got out of the stream? Or if you're like, Pastor TC, I'm just vibing, man. This has been a vibe and I'm just soaking. That's okay too. It's all right. It's okay again to be okay. It's like, I'm just thinking. I do want to hear. I want to give a couple seconds. Um, while you guys are thinking about that, um, Dr. Peggy, can you let us know where we can find you? Do you have any books? Do you have any resources that you like to share while you're here? Because you did such an incredible job. It's just been such a pleasure having you have this conversation with us. But yeah, we want to know where we can find you at more, or what you're doing right now, and how we can get more of you, for lack of better words.
Thanks. Thanks so much. Well, it's always a pleasure. I love these kinds of conversations about psychology and theology. I'm not a theologian, but that's why I hang out with Apostle Anthony. So we can have these rich conversations, and I feel safe to know he's coming from the Word and I can come from my area of expertise. I just want to say, some final words about this conversation is, it seems like some of the hindrances and barriers are pride and
Mm,
fear. And if we embrace more humility in terms of the leadership, the churches that are really doing this well, I think have a level of humility. Like, I don't know it all. I am going to rely on not only God, but the people. There are people in our midst who have
mm,
answers. Tiara, I've loved listening and learning from you today. There's people like Tiara in our midst who we can learn from if we're humble, willing to humble ourselves and to love one another, to truly embody that love and humility. I think will be the antidote to the pride and the fear that's kind of what I sense is one of the big barriers and
mm.
hindrances with this topic. But thanks for inviting me to be on the show. Anyone who's interested in connecting with me or learning more about what I do, you can find me on primarily Facebook because I'm old. So that's where I hang out. I still haven't figured out Instagram, even though I'm on there too. But I'm on Facebook as myself, Peggy Mitchell Clark. And I have a Facebook page that's Dr. Peg. So you can find me there, Peggy Mitchell Clark or Dr. Peg. And my website is drpegonline.com. So, yes, I do have a
Yes.
couple of books. One is called Do Something Different for a Change, an insider's guide to what your therapist knows but may not tell you.
Mm,
So it's really some of the hidden motivations of secular therapy that are often unconscious, that can do more harm than good. And of course, I'm an advocate for therapy, for good therapy, and always seeking the Lord. And it's the T-shirt says I need Jesus and a therapist, so it really is both. And I wish the church would get over this either or
Amen.
thinking. It's both. And so that's what my book is really about. Do something different for a change. And I have another book called Doggy Tales: Lessons on Life, Love, and Loss I Learned from My Dog. So it's about a little dog that I adopted the
aw,
day after my divorce, and all the lessons I learned about God and myself from that little dog. So those are two great. If you're looking for change and you want to be rooted in the Word of God and some good psychology. I say all good psychology is God's psychology, and we really benefit from both. The Lord gave us the natural and the supernatural, and it's wise to embrace both. So thank you again for such a rich conversation. I'm always humbled to be invited to the table. And I love to listen and learn just as much as I love to share from my area of expertise.
well, we enjoyed you so much. Like, I really am serious. Like, we really enjoyed you. By the way, chat, the link has been posted to her website. You should check it out.
Thank you.
Good morning, Alicia. Ah, man, finally got you in. But listen, you said you need therapy. Well, there's plenty of resources. We could definitely talk as well. I highly recommend you check out that link in the chat. That's a good start. Dr. Peggy is incredible. Just by sitting with her on the stream, so much rich information. Guarantee you're not gonna be disappointed. Um, with that being said, I'm gonna turn it over to you, Joe, because I love this phrase. I'm gonna learn it. Watch. I'm gonna pick it up, and it's simple, right? But I'm gonna give it to Joe because I want to butcher how good it is. But go ahead.
Guys, thank you all for joining us for another edition of Let It Rip. Just a reminder, we are here live every Saturday morning, 9:30 a.m. Eastern. Thank you to all of you that joined us in the chat and engaged in the conversation. That really empowers us as we are doing the show. Thank you, Dr. Peggy, for joining us and giving us some wonderful insight along the way. Until next week, we want you guys to remember two very important things: that you are prayed for and you are loved deeply. All right. Peace, y'all.